Sometimes players lose their way in a game, and their only guidance is audio, most likely dialogue. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to build a dialogue system for your game to help the player find their next mission. I hope you find it useful. Let's briefly talk about how the dialogue is written for this situation. In this scene, we have a campfire, and the first time we approach it, we hear the main line. And the reason I call it the main line is because it's related to the story. Then after some time passes, say 1 to 2 minutes, and then we get near the campfire again, we hear a new line that is not specifically related to the story, but it's more to help the player where they should go next. Although both lines are about the campfire, but they serve different roles. Let's have a listen.
A campfire. That means that there's people here. I think I should keep looking. I'm not sure who made this campfire, but certainly they're close.
Cool. I hope you get the idea behind how this dialogue is written. Now, in Wwise, organization is key. If we zoomed in, you'll notice that I have organized my sound units based on linear media templates, film, TV, and animation. I have created a BG's work unit, stands for background, and a DX work unit for dialogue, and Foley for Foley. In AAA games, there should be more like sound effects work unit, NPCs work unit, but I haven't done that because we don't need it in this scene. Inside the DX work unit, I have a folder called M, stands for main, CHA character dialogue, main character dialogue. Inside this folder, I'll try to include all the dialogue that is generated from the main character. If we expand it, we notice that we have main character interactions. This folder should include a folder of each object the player interacts with that result in sound or dialogue. As you can see, if we expand it, I've created a folder called interactions, int, campfire. Inside this folder, I have created one audio source, and it's the main line. I've also created a random container that contains all the hinting lines. And the hinting lines are 3 audio files that are different from each other. And as I said, they're not related to the story, but they're more to guide the player. Cool. Now we've got our sounds sorted and organized. Let's move to our events. As you can see in the Events tab here, I basically have the same management. BG's effect, I have some effects like Raven sounds and all that created in the backgrounds. And I have a dialogue folder and I have a Foley folder. Inside the dialogue folder, it's the same thing. I have interactions folder. Inside of that, I have a CFire, stands for campfire, _ interactions. Inside of it, I've created 2 events. The first event, play campfire mainline. This event triggers the mainline audio source. And play random line events triggers the random container that contains all the hinting lines. Sweet, that's it for the events. Now, let's not forget about the sound banks. In the sound bank, it's quite similar. I have an ambient work unit, a dialogue work unit, and a Foley work unit. Inside the dialogue work unit, I have main character dialogue sound bank. In this sound bank, I have included all the events that has to do with all the dialogue of the main character. And don't forget to generate your sound bank by going to the layouts and sound bank, or by pressing F7. Check the sound banks you want to generate, select generate checked, and you should be ready to go. Great, let's go to Unity. Now in Unity, all we need is to make a 3D audio emitter. And to do that, we have to create a game object. To create a game object, all you have to do is go to the hierarchy, right click, create empty. Now you have your game object. Now I believe organization is key here too. So what I've done is created a game object called Wwise _ M, stands for main character. This should include all the sounds that your main character produce, whether it's dialogue or sound effects. Inside of it, I have a game object called Wwise dialogue. This should include all the dialogue that your main character narrates. Inside of that, I have Wwise interactions audio emitter. Now I've named it this way because I want to use it as a prefab, not only to the campfire, but to any other game object that the player interacts with that results in dialogue or sound effects. Great, now you've created your game objects and organized them. I have to go to the inspector, press add component, search for capsule collider. Now I have already created my capsule collider. Make sure you check is trigger so that way your player can go inside that collider and then resize and position to your preference. And this is where I've put my collider where I think it's best for this example. Great, now that leads us to the script. You can add a script by pressing add component, type in script, press new script, and you can add it. Before I go to the script and explain how it works, I want to define to you guys the goal behind that script and what outcome do I want from it. Let's do it. My main goal from that script here is when the first time the player or the camera goes inside that collider, we hear the first line. And once the main line is triggered and played, a timing of 60 seconds starts to count down. Whether we are inside or outside the collider, it continues to count down. This is very important. And after these 60 seconds passed, I should not hear the hinting line whilst I'm inside the collider. Instead, I should only hear the hinting line when the player goes inside that collider again. This is very crucial because it tells us that the player is active and they're still searching for where to go next. That was basically the most challenging part of the script. Now, let's see how I scripted it. Great, we understand the goals that we need from that script. Let's see how it works together. For easier explaining, I'm going to divide the script into 3 sections. The first section is variable declarations. Second is the update method, quote unquote, the timer. And last but not least, the process. I want you to think of it as building a car. The variables, the timer, and the start method are the body parts of that car. The process and everything that we do after is simply putting these body parts together and making them functionable. Starting with variable declarations, we have 2 main important parts of this code. It's main line event and the random line event. In the script, I'm declaring both as public variables, which means that they'll be shown, accessed, and modified in Unity. Both are initialized with the value default. We will change these later with our events names. Third line is private bool main line is played equals false. Quite important because this line will be used as a flag in the code to track whether the main line has been played or not. Fourth line is public boolean is in collider. This will help us visually see if the player is inside or outside the collider. In the last line, we declare a private variable called timer and the type of float, and we initialize it with number 60. In our case, that means 60 seconds. Now to the update method, quote unquote, the timer. Now before I do that, I want to quickly go through the start method and explain the line that has been written there and what's the purpose behind it. This is simply a call method in Wwise Audio Engine, and it registers the game object that the script is attached to with the Wwise Audio Engine. This line is important for ensuring that Wwise can properly spatialize and position audio associated with this game object. In our case, since the dialogue is coming from first-person shooter point of view, it is not that important, but try to always use it just in case it was needed. Cool, back to the timer. Now I've put it inside the update method because this method is called once per frame. So it's constantly running in the background. But note, don't ever code sound to play inside this method. It's going to be a brutal mess. Please don't do it. Now inside it, we begin with an if statement that checks if the variable timer is greater than 0. So let's say if the timer is 60, then the timer is greater than 0. We get access and we find time minus equal time dot delta time. Pay attention here because this is very useful. Minus equal is an operator The first thing that it does, it subtracts the value on the right-hand side of the operator, which is time.delta_time, from the value on the left-hand side. That means from timer. And then it assigns the result of the subtraction back to the variable on the left-hand side. That means timer. So this is how it looks in math. Timer equals timer minus time.delta_time. That means timer equals 60, which is our initial number. We started with 60, minus 1, that equals 59. Now the timer is 59. Now you might be asking why time.delta_time is 1. Thank you for asking. Time.delta_time represent time in seconds. So what it does is it calculates the amount of time that is passed between the current frame and the previous one. And it continues to measure this as long as the game is on, but it doesn't add up because it only measures the amount of time between the current and the previous frame. And then it goes to the next one, measures that amount between them, reset to 0, so on and so forth. In the code, each time that is measured will be subtracted from time, and it goes on until it reaches 0. Then it checks again if we're greater than 0. We're not. We go to the else. We set timer to 0. That way we prevent going to negative values. Great, now let's gather these parts together and get this car moving. Let's start off by explaining what is OnTriggerExit and OnTriggerEnter. These are Unity callback methods that are called when the player enters or exits the trigger collider. As far as I know, these lines are written this way: private void OnTriggerExit in brackets collider other. Other is whatever object is interacting with the collider. In our case, it's the player. Inside of it, we start with an if statement that checks if the tag of other is not equal to player, then return. That means in Unity there are tags, and you can assign these tags to different game objects as shown here. I have assigned my first-person controller game object as the player tag. That means any other object that is not with the tag player, do not execute, return. This is really helpful. For example, there are NPCs and they move around the campfire and they are with other tags. Let's say NPC tag. If we didn't specify what tag we need to have to execute the code, then any object that gets inside or near that collider, we will hear the line, which is not what we want. That's why we only need the game object with the player tag to execute this code. Great. If it's the player, then assign is in collider as false, which means that the player now moved out of the collider. Cool. Now, OnTriggerEnter have two if statements. The first one checks if it's the player. The other one checks if the main line has been played or not. Remember the variable that I said it's going to be used as a flag to track if the main line is played or not? Here it comes to use. It reads like this: if not main line is played, then execute. Once we go in, we assign is in collider as true. That means we are inside the collider, and the little box will be checked, and then we post the sound by using this call method, aka soundEngine.postEvent mainline game object. When this line is executed, we will hear our main line. Once we hear this line, we assign main line is played as true. That will prevent us from playing the main line again. And after that, immediately we assign timer as 60. So now the countdown starts. After that, we call the random lines method that we've created to play the hinting lines. Else. And that else is associated with the second if statement that checks if the main line is played or not. So let's say, for example, that our main line is already played. The player goes inside the collider again. All good. When we get to the second if statement, we find that the main line is played. Then all of that is not going to get executed. Instead, it's going to jump right to else. And inside of else, we're calling play random lines method. That will take us to the method we've created, void play random lines. Since the player has entered and it checked if it's the player or not, then we've called the play random lines method, assign isn't collider as true because we're inside. After that, there's an if statement that checks if the timer is 0 or not, because we need to make sure that we have passed 60 seconds after the main line. One other reason to why we need this period between the main line and the hinting lines is your player might be really smart and find their next mission in less than 60 seconds. If the player could not make it after 60 seconds and they got closer to the campfire again, we can now give them the first hinting lines by using the akSoundEngine.post event, random lines event, game object. After this line is executed, we hear our first random hinting line, and once we hear it, we set the timer at 60. Now we give the player another 60 seconds to wander around and try to find where they should go next. Let's go to Unity and assign our events. Before we jump and play the game, we have to change the mainline bar here to the name of the event. This is very name sensitive, so whatever you copy here should be the same name as it's in Wwise. And you don't have to go to Wwise and copy the names. You can just go to Wwise Picker in Unity and find out your events. Press rename, Command C for copying, then go to mainline in the inspector window and Command V for pasting. Do the same thing for the random lines and you should be ready to go.
This looks like a dream I've had a couple of days ago. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's just a vision. There's probably a room where they killed people in this building. A campfire. That means that there's people here. I think I should keep looking. This campfire is fresh. Whoever made it is not too far from here.
If you made it till here, I just want to thank you and I hope this video was informative. Let me know what do you like to know more about in the next video. If you want the script, you can find it below in the description. Also, I've put a link to all the assets that I've used in this example. Before I leave you to go nerd out in game audio, check out my first shipped game with Nomad Droid Studio. It will be out to this world this year. I was the composer and sound designer for this beautiful puzzle game. I really recommend getting it if you love kawaii and cute little things. Very special thanks to my colleague Sara for helping me program this code, and Tyler Gillis from Aftertouch Audio for helping with creating YouTube videos. Hafid was with you, and happy scripting.